Hey everyone, this is David Wolinsky of NoDon'tDie.com, back with another audio interview from the archives. Here I'm bringing the second half of my conversation with Peer Schneider, the general manager of IGN. We spoke on February 8th, 2017, and if you'd like to read a full transcript of our conversation, please check out the link in the description below. Also below you'll see a link to my Patreon, which goes a long way towards helping support the work that I'm doing, like on this interview. Thanks. The corporate page for IGN, you know what page I'm talking about? It just has corporate information about the company, ad spec, stuff like that. It says that IGN has, quote, sharp opinions. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you feel, those opinions manifest, or like what makes these opinions you guys have so sharp?
So first of all, I'm amazed that you found that corp site. It's one of those projects where we keep on saying, man, we got to fix this. This is years old. We made some tweaks to it because it kind of described an IGN at the time. Well, I think we made some copy changes in the last year that clarified it, but it described a very different, more lifestyle, male lifestyle IGN that even includes.
Yeah, I noticed that was gone because I remember reading it before. I was going to ask a little bit about. Because I feel like there was stuff sort of defining who the audience was, and I think this was a little bit more in line with the Maxim identity you guys were talking about, or you were talking about.
Yeah, we can talk about that. So it's actually IGN Entertainment was not just a corporation that had IGN in it, right? At one point, it even had Rotten Tomatoes in it, by the way. But it was a very male-focused collection of websites, and the other big one was Ask Men. And so even when IGN moved away a little bit from the Maxim model, right? Like years ago, we shuttered our star site, which was, look at all these pretty celebrities kind of coverage. When we did that, Ask Men still was the Maxim to our IGN. And so they were both under the IGN Entertainment umbrella. So when we were acquired by Ziff Davis a few years ago, Ask Men actually moved out of IGN Entertainment, but we didn't update our corporate website. It's one of those things, right? On a list of things to do, you go for what
I understand.
You go for where most of the users are hanging out. And our corp site wasn't something that a lot of users or a lot of advertisers, quite frankly, accessed. We'd deep link to our ad specs and stuff, but never to kind of our brand. And IGN is not a niche brand where advertisers actually kind of go and look up who we are. We're very vocal and in touch with all our clients. And so kind of let it sit for a while. And yes, now it still says the greatest sites known to man. And that's because games media is still predominantly male. It's not a choice. It boils down to what the different game playing segments actually consume. And, with an audience, it's 80% male no matter what platform we put the content on. So even on like a Snapchat discover, and Snapchat has a much bigger female audience than, I'd say our IGN homepage. But even there, the type of content we produce, think of, South Park, Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, all of that stuff attracts a predominantly male audience. So now over the last couple of years, our female readership and viewership certainly has grown across all the different platforms. I got to dig up the stats, but we were over 95% male at one point. And, when you look at kind of 80% or on Facebook where posts can go viral and travel, you even get to like, 60% male.
Right.
It certainly has changed, and our corporate identity, I think, hasn't kept pace with that.
Well, what do you feel, because IGN does date back to the 90s, and you do mention, it did have sort of specific focus before.
Yep.
What do you feel IGN's role was in sort of creating or shaping the quote-unquote gamer identity?
Yeah, so one thing, just for background, like if you go back to 1997, when I ran the Nintendo coverage for IGN, I would call up the publishers behind games coming to the Nintendo 64. And I'd have to, first of all, explain who I am. And then I'd have to explain why they should even be talking to me, because I was working for a website and not a magazine, right? They cared. If you called up and you said, I'm with EGM or I'm with Next Generation or with Game Informer, they'd perk up and say, awesome, we should work on this review, right? With IGN, they're like, they couldn't tell that there was an audience because they they only knew what they knew. They knew that they walked into a Target or Walmart and saw the magazine rack and they saw these magazines there, but they would never stumble onto our website. And so what we had to establish in the very beginning is that you could trust websites that we were kind of taking the magazine approach at a time where a lot of websites were more kind of like the news groups and were fan sites, like people who never called any publicists. They just they consume games the way, you go to the store, you buy the game, you play it, and you review it. And suddenly here we are saying, hey, just like the boys at Next Gen next door, we want to get the game before it's out so we can have an early review. And they said, well, good luck, goodbye, right? So what we worked hard on is kind of establish that a gaming website is trusted, can be trusted even though it has an independent and, you said sharp voice, but it has a kind of an honest voice. I mean, we were not afraid to trash a big brand, right? Mortal Kombat mythologies, for example. Mortal Kombat was very popular at the time, and we trashed this game and said it was awful because you couldn't see where you were jumping to. You're falling into a hole and you're dead. That's not a good game. And that kind of sharpness actually hurt, establishing relationships with these companies because it was they just, for some reason, didn't get as upset when that happened in the magazine, which debuted 2 months after the game came out. Suddenly, somebody had the power to torpedo their game launch, right, with a negative opinion. And so it was about establishing our voice as being trusted, but also respected, that they wouldn't get mad at us when we said something bad about them. And for the audience, it was about really gamer pride. And we actually have an old T-shirt take on a gay pride logo that said Game Pride on it, with logo. It was one of our most popular T-shirts back in the 90s. It was also a time that gaming was often vilified. There were people thought
Lieberman,
people thought video games would teach you to kill and shoot people. There was the notion that if you were a gamer, you'd never get laid. And so all our messaging and our T-shirts really kind of played to that. We had a T-shirt that was I'm in charge of my actions, or I'm in control of my actions. We had a T-shirt. There were all these kind of slogans for gamers, like I score more often. Again, made a lifestyle time, but it was trying to counter that stereotype that gamers are just like these boys in their basements who will never have a girlfriend, and and vice versa. And so we played against that, and we really tried to establish the concept of gamer pride, that you're fine sharing with your friends that you're playing games. And there were some hurdles, like when Facebook, for example, when Facebook let brands play in their space, media companies like ours, we were tiny on Facebook because people didn't want to tip off their friends that they were into the type of content IGN covered. Whereas on other platforms like YouTube, we're seeing all this exponential growth. On Facebook, it was like, high school student doesn't want to tip off her boyfriend or his girlfriend that he's into these video games, and kind of wouldn't share our content. And that has obviously changed rapidly in the years that followed.
How do you think that the gamer identity fed Gamergate?
Well, I think Gamergate is interesting because there's a part of the audience that first of all felt threatened by games becoming something that they didn't want, right? And for them, the story was all like, well, certain games that I like now will cease to exist and will no longer cater to me because there are all these new gamers coming in, whether they're female or they like different genres, like what people dismissively call walking simulators, right? There was fear, I think. When I think as media we're preaching the story that it's great that we get this diversity of content. There's still way more games than you can ever play that are kind of the murder, death, kill type variety, or like your kind of action Hollywood blockbuster equivalent game. And so I think there was a segment in that audience that felt that fear. There were certainly people who thought everybody's corrupt. Every media publication is just they're in cahoots with each other. They get together in meeting rooms and saying like, hey, what score are you going to give this game? Because, they didn't advertise with us, so we're going to give it a 3. Like there was this weird fear where, every minor thing was picked apart and everybody thought everybody was on the take. And I have been here 19 years, and the amount of times that a game company has ever tried to bribe are really zero, right? Like there's no overt attempt to influence us other than kind of the timing stuff, right? Like a publisher may tell you, hey, we're not going to send you a game. Because whatever reason, and it's like, well, they're afraid that you're going to review it early because the game's crap, right? And so what we did is pass that on to our audience, I think we were all very surprised that those actions didn't actually tell the story much more, that we're very much on the side of the consumer. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think whenever you assign a label to a group or someone,
right.
We're actually capturing a lot of different groups, and at its worst, like there were people identifying as Gamergaters who were just terrible people. Let's be honest, right? Who were who were kind of preaching the type of rhetoric that you just go, oh my God, who are you? That's not nice.
I mean, do you think enthusiast press fostered any aspects of that? Whether it's the terrible people or the people crusading for objective reviews? Do you think? I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not really asking this, but I mean, did any of your colleagues at the time, did they feel at all responsible for what was going on?
Well, I think there was a lot of discussion around misogyny. That there's certainly there were certainly the radical elements that were doxing people and going after female members of the industry or anybody really outspoken with a message different from theirs. I think they were mad that some people have a platform, and so they countered it in the worst possible ways, right? Like, just there's no other way to put this. It's just not okay, right? And I think that derailed a lot of attention from ways to actually fix this and counter this. And so one thing, just to open the kimono on what we did, we got together. We had a lot of different opinions in our editorial pool of people saying, hey, we need to oppose this movement vocally and support the people who are being doxxed and who are being hurt and who are being scared by this. And then we had the other half saying the moment you play into it, it's basically playing into amplifying that message that, hey, if you say something against our ideals, we will come after you. Like if you amplify that message, you may make it actually worse, right? And so we at one point made the decision. We said we're not going to mention this movement. We're going to say, here's what we require from you as people who interact in our tools, on our Twitter feeds and Facebook pages. This is what IGN wants from you. You cannot do this crap. You cannot be you can't be misogynistic about things. You cannot dox people. You cannot insult people. It can't become personal. You can't, push a radical agenda like that. We said on our platforms, and we never mentioned the movement. We said we're not going to empower it, and we're going to basically silence it to death. But at the same time, still kind of cover the games industry and the things that we care about. And it was an approach. It got us criticism from some, but it certainly got to a point where if you saw the term Gamergate in our comments, there would be 10 people saying, what is that?
What do you make of
And by the way, any group with any radical group or any radical segment, I don't want to say everybody in that group is radical. It's like any segment that is radical will thrive on opposition too, right? So the more you yell at it, the bigger it will grow. And so that's why it didn't make sense for us to just constantly write kind of take the opposition to a movement. It was more about, we're going to write about the stuff we love and we're going to highlight the stuff we don't like, but we're not, our life's mission is not going to be to constantly discredit something.
Yeah. I mean, I remember a lot of media outlets, didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to react, didn't react, took a long time to react. Is there anything you would have done differently in hindsight?
Certainly I think we should have gone out earlier and tried to kind of get the story behind it. Now, we did very much focus on the games and the people making the games and the movies and so forth, and less on the gamer culture aspect of it. We want to be part of gamer culture, but we're not always, we're not the place where you learn that much about it. I know that sounds a little bit like a contradiction. We're not, like a Polygon or a Kotaku, I'd say, are much more about the gamer culture, the behind the scenes of that community, whereas like we have the community interact with it, but we don't tell that story as well. Maybe a mistake. But no, there are many different opinions on how we should have tackled it even internally. And like, I would have loved to go out and try to produce a piece that tries to tell both sides of the story earlier, but it was also very difficult to cut through the passion and actually get to what the story was, right? Because the term was also being used by so many different people for so many different things.
What do you make of the rise of these Donald Trump Gamergate comparisons? Do you think, are we learning the wrong lessons, or are we letting the wrong messages be spread?
Well, it's very similar. It's right. It feels a little bit like fighting windmills. In the end, I think the press should have the freedom to criticize, and the press should have the freedom to call out falsehoods without being labeled fake immediately, right? Like, there's a segment, again, of the audience that will not take anything, even provable fact as fact, and always think it's a conspiracy. And then I think that makes it very difficult. But at the same time, you also have to strive for balance, and you have to, even when you sometimes have to tell a story that you don't like. Like, if we absolutely hate a game and that game is the most popular game ever, we need to tell that story, and we need to figure out why so many people like that game and tell that story, instead of just pretending like, nope, our opinion is the only one that counts, and therefore we're going to shun this property. And I think that happens a little bit in politics, where, it's certainly, Mr. Trump fostered an adversarial relationship with a lot of the mainstream press out there, and I think that the articles are written by humans, and humans have feelings. And as much as you want to remove yourself from that stuff, I can imagine someone at the New York Times, a storied, respected publication, probably doesn't approach an article the same way being called fake news every day than they would be if there was mutual respect between the White House and the publications. That kind of stuff happens in games media too, right? Once in a while you have a game publisher, and the relationship can almost become adversarial because they think you're unfair or you're wrong, and you have to figure out how to still give the audience the fair story without letting your personal biases influence that.
Well, I have just a couple more questions for you here, like 3 or 4. I know you said you have about an hour, but hopefully I can stick to that, or if you're able to go over by a minute or two, I'll try to talk quick. But something we had talked about before, and I'd love to have you sort of reiterate, is, it sort of occurred to me, there are so many more conferences now than there were 20 years ago in the game industry. There's multiple PAXs and on and on and on. And we talked a little bit about this before, but can you tell me a little bit about sort of the challenges of, I guess, IGN, but any media outlet where, is the rise of these conferences spreading your talent thinner? How does it complicate your jobs?
Yeah, look, travel specifically, I don't think the audience thinks about it that much. When there is an event like Gamescom, right, you're packing up production equipment and you're packing up people and sending them somewhere where, literally it takes a day just to travel. And that means a day's worth of creation from each one of these people is wiped out. And that can impact your business, right? Like, we need video views, we need content views in order to exist, because we need to show advertisements, or we need to produce content for subscribers, for example. It doesn't matter what your business model is. It gets complicated when you're spreading yourself thin. And then there's the aspect that, something like an E3 or a Gamescom, there are big announcements, there are big video opportunities, there are big sponsorship opportunities from our partners, right? Like, a company can sponsor your live stream and all that. And so the work you put in is repaid by big numbers, big traffic, big audience. The same thing isn't true for something like a PAX. And, it's true, it's not also not true maybe for New York Comic Con, where there are fewer announcements. It's more about these panels that nobody can actually film and stream.
Well, you said also that, you don't, you showed me around your offices, and, you don't have any backup warehouses or studios where you have duplicate, duplicate lighting, duplicate cameras, duplicate everything.
That stuff's expensive, right? I mean,
I know it is.
Capturing 4K footage now, right? That's a big nut to crack, where some game publishers are calling us and asking for advice because we've been working on it for so long. And we usually have one box that can do that because the stuff is so expensive. And, you're packing up cameras. We don't have oodles of equipment sitting around. So for E3, what we do is we actually break down our San Francisco-based studio. We have a small studio, like more of a discussion corner in LA as well, which would, of course, be much nicer. But that's just not the right equipment for a gaming event like this. And so we break down our studio and our streaming equipment here, bring it to LA. And so E3 is about much more. It has much bigger impact than just a couple of days and the cost of sending basically the entire company down there. But PAX is a good example where the opportunity is not news coverage and big numbers. The opportunity is meeting your audience, right? Gamers and fans of your brand are in one place. So what we do is we take, a handful of our personalities, of our editors, video folks, and send them to the event to actually do meet and greets and panels. And there's no direct value back to the company. You can put an ad on it, right? It's not content that is widely viewed. It's about building fans and making sure that the fans are seeing that they're humans on the other side. It's about building trust. The moment you talk to an editor who reviews a game, you talk to them in person, you're not going to walk away saying that guy was paid off, because you notice how much you have in common, and that there's a human being just sharing their own impressions. And I think that's super, super important, but it's also very expensive and very taxing to support all that in a big country.
Well, something that the game industry, this will be my second to last one for you, something that the game industry and that the game media have in common is that it's, it's an increasingly hard place or tough place to go to sort of establish yourself and make a lifelong career. What's something that you wish IGN could do to make the space sort of more amenable or sort of more nourishing, I guess, for writers to be able to stay and be part of it?
I would love it if we had a platform where it was easy to let people create content and then showcase their skills and grow them and let them monetize it. I mean, YouTube has done a wonderful job creating a platform. We're not that kind of company. We're a content team, right? We're a publication. We're a newspaper without paper, and so I would love it if we could do something like that. And we've tried it a few times, and we have actually succeeded a few times, and I think people don't see that very often. So let's take the wikis, right? So for more than a decade, we published strategy guides where we did exactly what we did in the print business before. We wrote these tips, put them online, full walkthroughs of content, and you could read them, and people would bookmark them and come back. And then one day, we ported all of our strategy guides into a wiki format, and all of that content then became editable by the masses. So people could fix a mistake, they could also add new ones, or they could do their own stuff and expand. And so what happened is we had people just for the love of IGN or just for the love of a game started to create content on our wikis. And it may look like you're just kind of sending content off into the ether, but what actually happens is that we see it. And so we hired people as freelancers. First step most of the time is to discover someone in the community and make them a freelancer. Whether that's someone who's awesome at community interaction or moderation, it's somebody who wrote awesome blogs on our blogging platform, or somebody who edited wikis. We go out and we say, awesome, do you want to write a freelance piece? And we created this behind-the-scenes program called IGN All-Stars, where somebody who contributes a lot of content that's good gets a special label, and we are aware of them, and we chase them. And so a lot of the editors we hired on our wiki team who are professionally working here in the office and are paid, came actually from the wiki editing community. It's something that we don't push that much because obviously there's a limit on how many people we can bring on. It's a little bit of a secret, but those opportunities I'd like to think exist everywhere. Like if you are a motivated, driven content contributor and you run an awesome Tumblr or you run an awesome YouTube channel, even if it only has 1,000 subs, that, you know, we can help. We can show off your content. We can help you grow, and we can certainly hire you in the end. And then one thing just related to that, we actually have a program. I would love to do this eventually for content, but we have a program called Code Foo, Code CODE FOO, where we teach budding engineers, people who want to go into engineering, into coding. We teach them how to code features for an IGN website. And it's a paid internship, basically. Every summer, we select the most promising people, and they're all people with, no offense, but crappy resumes, right? They don't have a big name company on their resume, and so they may struggle to find a job at a big company. And so we take them in and we teach them the stuff that matters, the skills. We expose them to a newsroom and working with content creators, and they go through this program. At the end of the program, we sometimes bring on some of them, but I think most of them emerge with new skills and then are able to find their way into bigger companies just on the strength of having worked here.
I don't know. I mean, there are so many variables. Like, you know, I have a pretty good resume. And, you know, I've been working on this project for years, 2 years now. And, you know, when we met, I mentioned sort of, it's right around the SAG-AFTRA strike starting. I mentioned my interest in trying to place articles about just labor issues in the game industry. And everywhere I go, and I also tried, I think it's Justin over there, just either people are not receptive, they're not into it, or they're not interested.
It's tough to break too. It's everybody's got a full day of things to do, things to manage, right? Like, I mean, take for example the job of a features editor. That guy has to plan the features all the way out, right, through the year, and then he has to schedule them and get resources assigned, and then meet with a video team to see which ones need to be videos and how they get promoted, and then has to get people to actually create that content, find the freelancers or go to the freelancers he or she has and assign content, get those people paid. You know, like it's a big, yeah.
Oh, I know. I've done that job.
It's a big process. And so sometimes, unfortunately, your day is full. And so it's very difficult to step away and think of how to you know, create a program that exposes those tasks to others. So what we actually did, we did an event for our anniversary where all the higher level leaders of IGN, so the head of video, the head of editorial content, me, we did a panel for an hour where we told people how to get a job in the games industry, and basically told them, like, you bring your resume and we will do a one-on-one session with each of you and tell you what's wrong and what's right about your resume. And so I think I did 50 resumes. I wrote, like, I worked the entire weekend on it, but, like, I wrote detailed feedback for each resume specifically and shared it back. And, you know, it makes me feel really good that I can help people and it helped people. But think about it. That was at an event where, you know, we're kind of limited to 400 people attending. Think about just jobs like reviewing games. That's got to be every gamer's dream job, to be able to play games early and be creative that way. And if you open that up widely, how do you even cope? How do you keep up with all the demand for information?
Mm-hmm. Well, this will be the last one I ask for you, and then I'll let you go back to your day in the many, many rooms over there. What do you think video games have accomplished?
Wow. Well, I mean, if you go back to the early days of video games, I think, first of all, video games have created a new form of people playing, a new way to get people to play together who may have disregarded the old forms. You know, people have played tabletop games and card games for, you know, decades and centuries. And I think as the tastes of new audiences developed and were more into kind of, you know, in the digital age, watching TV shows and consuming content in different ways, video games managed to help people get back together, compete in ways where you didn't need You didn't need a judge. The machine became the judge, right? It's like it's sports, but the machine is connecting everybody. And I always think that's a very fascinating role. Video games have taken the storyteller role, where they are able to tell you a story just like a book would. In the very beginning, very simple stories. You have to use your imagination a lot. Nowadays, very complex stories, from action-oriented stuff to really meaningful, deep stories. See walking simulators where you're immersed in a world and you're soaking in a story by experiencing it. And you have the storyteller, but then you also have the kind of competition and collaboration factor where people play together and work together and compete against each other and just have fun together. And so I think the biggest thing video games established early was that they could be escapism, that they could let you immerse yourself in other worlds and really kind of take on a new persona, a new role, and over the years have grown to become this all-encompassing interactive medium where the next step up for books. I'm not saying video games are as good as our best books out there. They're not, right? But it's like that's the path now, is that we can tell awesome stories while also sucking you in and giving you choices.
Are you surprised that you're still as passionate about
video
games
I'm not,
as you are?
I am, but I'm not, right? I have kids now, and so all of these things chip away at my time. When I lived in Japan, I woke up early in the morning to play Final Fantasy VI, and I would play for like 48 hours nonstop and just order a pizza. And I don't do that anymore. That's not because I don't want to. I would love to be able to just sit down with FF15 and just keep playing it. I love that game. But there's the real world, right, that captivates me. And so I do realize that I may be as passionate about games and certainly about covering them and writing them, but that passion doesn't manifest itself in video games being the only thing I do. I've got all these other things I have to take care of. And by the way, I went back into tabletop games too and play a ton of that because tabletop games have evolved at the same time, taken things from video games and kind of game systems from video games and made them more interesting too. So video games have evolved so much. It is, even if you're bored with what happened yesterday, man, are you going to be excited about what's coming tomorrow?